This video was inspired by Sweet Supersonics' The Sonic the Hedgehog Dark Age Was Amazing video. Hey Michael, what are you up to? Oh hey Deadpool, I'm just enjoying the time while I have as I'm about to release a very controversial video, and whenever I do that I risk a giant angry mob coming at my doorstep. Controversial video? What's new on your channel? Did you watch your last video? Yeah I did. Wait, did you just say an angry mob is coming here? Okay, I gotta go. Bye! Cue the new intro. Oh, I'm unbeatable! What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Sodium285, and if you've seen the title, you know what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to do a little bit of a hot take. Here goes. In my opinion, Phase 4 is not the weakest phase in the MCU so far. Phase 2 is. Now, before you get into the comments and say stuff like your opinion sucks, you have no idea what you're talking about, your take is invalid, blah blah blah, at least hear me out real quick. Love it or hate it, Phase 4 has been a monumental phase in the history of the MCU. Not only was it the first chapter in this new era of the MCU, aka the Multiverse Saga, but it also marked a shift in style from the Infinity Saga. Things are different, and audiences and fans have been divided by some of these changes in the MCU. Most would in fact rank Phase 4 as the weakest of the 4 phases in the MCU so far, saying stuff like, it was quantity over quality, there was too much content, the MCU is dying after this phase, and it's a major step down in terms of quality from the previous 3 phases. Now, while I'm hardly the first person on YouTube to defend Phase 4 and the Multiverse Saga in general, as Pillar of Garbage and the Writer's Block had both made great videos defending Phase 4, and Matty Crescent Moon, another great guy who spoke to me in the comments of his video, also made a video defending the current state of the MCU. Not only would I add to the defense of Phase 4, but do it in a different way. And to do this, I'm going to start off by addressing the criticism of Phase 4 being a drop in quality from the first 3 phases of the MCU, and whether I agree. Now, I do in fact agree with most people that Phase 4 is in fact a step down from Phase 3 as a whole, but to be honest, from even before Phase 4 had even started, I knew it was going to be that way. Phase 3 as a whole was absolutely fantastic, that there was no way Phase 4 was going to be as great as that. So I wanted to judge it on its own terms, and because of that, I enjoyed it for what it ended up being. However, I think there can be more debate regarding whether Phase 4 was actually a drop in quality from Phase 1 and Phase 2. I would honestly say Phase 4 is very much on par with Phase 1 in terms of quality, but I would also say Phase 4 is actually better than Phase 2, and the last statement I just said is going to be the central focus of this video. I'm going to be explaining why I think Phase 4 is better than Phase 2, and why I actually think Phase 2 is the weakest phase in the MCU so far. Now, the number one argument a lot of people would say against my argument for Phase 4 being better than Phase 2 goes back to the too much content criticism. But Michael, well yes, Phase 4 has more to offer than Phase 2 in terms of quantity, but not more in quality. Now make no mistake, I'm a quality over quantity person like most people, which is why I think we should look at the actual quality of all the movies and shows in both of these phases. Quick note, I'm not counting Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, Daredevil, or any of the other Marvel, ABC, or Netflix shows because Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios weren't involved in them. Those were Marvel Television produced shows under Jeff Loeb, so I'm only counting any projects that had Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios directly involved in. Now, this is not going to be a hate towards Phase 2, as I don't think it's a bad phase, nor do I think there has been a bad phase in the MCU so far. I consider myself to be one of the few people still optimistic about the MCU as a whole, alongside people like, as I had mentioned earlier, Matty Crescent Moon, Ren Geekness and Zach Pope, 2 other awesome people on YouTube you should definitely check out. I believe that there hasn't been a single bad MCU movie or show yet. Every MCU project has been at the very least decent, which I think is a good thing. So because of this, and to help you understand how I decide which phases are better than others, I've decided to draw a line between the projects in each phase that I love and don't love, and some of the ones I don't love in fact come close to me loving. If you're curious about my love-don't-love ratio for Phase 1 and Phase 3, I'll show them on screen right now, and as you can see, the movies I love in both phases, especially in Phase 3's case, outweigh the ones I don't. And I'm going to apply the same system for both Phase 2 and Phase 4. So I'm going to start off by giving my personal opinions on each movie in Phase 2, and then I'll do the same with each movie and show in Phase 4, and they will determine the love-don't love ratio for each of those two phases. After that, I'll discuss some other factors that contribute to why I believe Phase 4 is better than Phase 2, from the general consensus on those movies to some behind-the-scenes stuff. So with these 6 Phase 2 movies, let's begin. Iron Man 3. I love Iron Man 3. I think it's very underrated. I love how it shows how far Tony has come up until this point in the MCU, showing how he is Iron Man with or without his suit. The darker tone worked for the more psychological theme this movie was going for. Robert Downey Jr. gives possibly one of his best performances as Iron Man, which is saying a lot since he's always fantastic. Brian Tyler's score is so memorable, and I found the Mandarin twist to be funny. Also, Killian might be one of the darkest villains in any superhero movie. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the love category. For the Dark World. I'll be real with you guys. I think the Dark World is a tad bit overhated. Like I had said earlier, I don't think there has been a bad MCU movie so far, so I do think it's good. With that said, yeah, it's not great and is a major step down from the first 4 movie, which I love and a huge defender of. While the acting and action is good and the 4 Loki dynamic is compelling, at the same time, a lot of the action feels like a lot to hide the fact that the story is not as strong as in the first. Malekith is a poor and one-note villain who's shockingly forgettable, so while I don't think For the Dark World is bad, I am going to replace it in the don't love category. Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now this is where things are going to start getting very controversial, because this is many people's favorite MCU movie, so I want to make something clear. I think Winter Soldier is a very good movie. I like it a lot, and in fact I almost love it. But I'm not quite there yet. What? While I do think the action is excellent, the story and the politics are handled very well, and the chemistry between Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson was off the charts, the one thing that holds this movie back for me a bit is the fact that for a movie with the subtitle of The Winter Soldier, Bucky, aka the Winter Soldier himself, has a real lack of screen time, so the subtitle feels a little redundant. And it's a shame because there is a lot to love about this movie, so maybe if the subtitle was Hail Hydra, I might actually have this in my top 10. But as it is, it just misses being in the love category, so I'm putting it in the don't love category. Guardians of the Galaxy. If you thought my take on Winter Soldier was a hot take, buckle your seatbelts, because while I do think Guardians of the Galaxy is a good movie, at the same time, I think it's the most overrated MCU movie. Move this man! Now, I know a lot of people like to say that Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther are the most overrated, but for me, Guardians of the Galaxy ticks all the right boxes to be the most overrated. While I do think Star-Lord, Rocket, Groot, and especially Gamora were great protagonists, I felt Drax was unnecessary and was just there to be the power man of the team, even though Groot could have easily fit that role. It's still a fun film to watch. I'm just not as crazy about these 2 Guardians of the Galaxy movies like a lot of people are, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in the don't love category. Avengers Age of Ultron. While I do agree this is the weakest Avengers movie so far, in the MCU at least, I do in fact love Age of Ultron a lot. I actually think it's very underappreciated and it does so many things right. I like Ultron as a villain a lot, seeing the Avengers bounce off each other with their interactions. I love the grittier tone, and I think there are individual scenes that are just as good or maybe better than in the first Avengers. The fact that Joss Whedon condensed the scene of Thor's vision of the Infinity Stones in favor of more scenes at Hawkeye's house to have the interactions between the Avengers show how much this movie being character driven meant to him, and I really enjoyed how character driven it was. I might get some backlash from this choice, but I'm putting Avengers Age of Ultron in the love category. And finally, to close off Phase 2, Ant-Man. This movie is completely slept on. Ant-Man is actually one of my favorite superhero movie origin stories. Scott's rise to heroism and the theme of family is so great here. Paul Rudd is so charming as Scott Lang. delivering on the comedic moments, but also on the heartfelt moments. Luis is a hilarious supporting character with his unique storytelling style. This is actually my favorite Phase 2 movie, so you know where this is going, in the love category. So those are all of the Phase 2 projects, and as you can see, unlike Phase 1 and Phase 3, the ratio between the ones I love and don't love is very much even. While this doesn't make it a bad phase, it does make it a weaker phase by comparison if the projects I love and don't love even each other out. Now let's see how the love-don't love ratio fares for Phase 4's 17 movies, shows, and even the specials, which I count as movies anyway. So, let the controversy begin. Starting off with WandaVision. This show was absolutely amazing. The sitcom aesthetic, Elizabeth Olsen's Oscar-worthy performance, the theme of dealing with grief, Wanda saying goodbye to Vision, Catherine Hahn's delightful performance as Agatha, who was an amazing villain. WandaVision's just such a spectacular show with a great season-long storyline. This definitely belongs in the love category. Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This show was doing really well for its first 5 episodes, episode 5 being my favourite. The politics, the buddy cop banter between Sam and Bucky, John Walker being a very interesting character, and the theme of what kind of Captain America Sam needs to be. But then in the finale, they revealed who the power broker was, and I did not like it, as I felt it made no sense. So because of that major issue, I have to say, while I almost loved this show, it's not quite there yet, so it's in the don't love category. Loki Season 1. This show was an absolute ton of fun. It gave a new perspective of how big the MCU can truly be. From Loki's great development, to Sylvie and Mobius being great characters, to the TVA and Kang the Conqueror, it was such a great show and set up a lot of great stuff for Season 2. Definitely one I love, into the love category it goes. Black Widow. I never understood the hate towards this movie. I personally thought Black Widow was great. Sure, the villains may not be the best, but the family story of this film was so emotional. No movie has managed to bring me to tears in its first 10 minutes more than this one. Even Logan didn't, and that's one of the best superhero movies ever made. Sure, the third act gets a bit bloated and big, but Captain America the Winter Soldier was the same with its third act, and I didn't have a problem with it in that movie, so I don't have a problem with it in this one. The emotional family story of Natasha reconciling with her parents and her sister was so great and was an amazing central focus of this movie that I think Black Widow deserves its place in the love category. What If Season 1. Now, I didn't have the highest expectations for this show. Marvel's animated shows after Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes have mostly been uninspiring, to say the least, except the maybe Marvel's Spider-Man. Overhated show, by the way. But What If ended up being better than I had expected. The episodes vary in quality, some are forgettable, some are actually enjoyable, so What If, in the end, was a show I at least like, just not love. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is absolutely fantastic. Dustin Daniel Cretton gives such an amazing style to this movie. The choreography is amazing. Simu Liu's performance and range of emotion is absolutely on point. Awkwafina made a great supporting character, and the family story here was so compelling. Shang-Chi is definitely going into the love category. Eternals. Now, my opinion of this movie has gotten a little higher than when I had ranked the MCU movies back in January, but Eternals is still a movie I don't love. It definitely has its strong points, such as Chloe Zhao's directing, the acting from the cast, especially Gemma Chan, and the movie is stunning to look at. However, I felt the story tried to do too much in one movie, and some of the Eternals themselves felt underdeveloped. I still want to see more of these characters in the future, but as of now, Eternals will go into the don't love category. Hawkeye. I adore this show. I think it deserves so much more attention. It's such a fun show, and I had a blast watching it. Seeing Jeremy Renner finally getting to be the lead of his own Marvel project, and Clint's redemption of his time as Ronin, Kate Bishop being such an endearing and charming character, Jeremy Renner and Haley Steinfeld's amazing banter, which may be my favorite banter in the entire MCU. I already loved Yelena after Black Widow, but I love her even more after Hawkeye, and the story of and themes of family and heroism was great. This is actually one of my favorite superhero shows and favorite shows period, so it easily goes into the love category. Spider-Man No Way Home. This is one of my favorite superhero movies of all time. What could have easily been a fan service trip ended up being an emotional journey for Peter. Tom Holland and Willem Dafoe give such Oscar-worthy performances. Peter having to sacrifice everything he loves was very sad, especially when he had to say goodbye to Ned and MJ. This was an emotional roller coaster, one of my favorite superhero movies. Slap this in the love category for sure. Moon Knight. I know this is going to be very controversial, but I was actually quite disappointed with this one.
Something so controversial yet so brave.
I wanted to love this show, and it ended up being a show with very good acting, some good third acts in its first two episodes, a very good fifth episode, but not very interesting to me. I thought the villain was forgettable, the characters were hit or miss, any jokes made didn't really work for me, and I very much lost a lot of interest by the end. If you love this show, I'm really happy for you. It's decent, and I wish I loved it, but I don't. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. To be honest, I actually enjoyed this one more than the first Doctor Strange movie, and I'm not really a Sam Raimi fan. I just felt the characters were more interesting, the story was a bit more interesting, Wanda was a better villain, Strange himself was a better protagonist who was easier to root for, and Christine had more of a purpose in this one than in the first one. Also, the humor was better than in the first one. Sure, there wasn't much multiversal madness and the ending was a little weird, but I did like it quite a bit. It's not one I love, but I did think it was a nice step in the right direction for the Doctor Strange franchise. Miss Marvel. This was yet another fun show that I really loved. I loved the coming of age story that Kamala Khan goes through. Iman Vellani is very endearing as Kamala. Bruno and Nakia are great characters, and you get this nice family story. I don't care what others say, I personally thought this show was great, so it goes into the love category. For Love and Thunder. Hot take. I love this movie. It's actually my favorite Thor movie so far. I personally enjoyed the humor a lot and never felt it derailed any of the emotional moments, with many of those emotional moments having me feel tense and sad when Thor and Jane say goodbye to each other, as an example of a time I felt sad watching this movie. This movie has a lot of heart at its core, and its theme of purpose hit me. I know this will for sure be controversial, but I'm going to go ahead and place For Love and Thunder in the love category. I think it's the most overhated MCU movie. She-Hulk Attorney at Law. I honestly feel this show is wildly overhated. I personally enjoyed it. It was entertaining. I enjoyed the sitcom vibe. The first two episodes in particular I thought were really good. I will say though, the finale was weird and some of the stuff done with Daredevil I question whether it was a good idea. But overall, I like the show. I just don't love it. Into the don't love category it goes. Werewolf by Night. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not the biggest fan of this one either. Now I totally understand why so many of you love it. You loved the horror style of it and how it finally brought the horror genre to the MCU, giving it a darker edge. And that's why I don't love it. You see, horror is not a genre that gravitates to me. It's not terrible. I really like the visual aesthetic and I appreciate what it was doing. I just was not in its target audience. So yeah, I don't love it. Black Panther Wakanda Forever. While I do prefer the first Black Panther movie, I still love Wakanda Forever. While it does take a few minutes to find a definitive lead, when it does, Letitia Wright commands the screen. She and Angela Bassett were robbed of Oscars. The emotion was so powerful, and the journey Shuri goes on is great. So yeah, I truly love this movie. And finally, the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. While I haven't been as high on the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies as a lot of people have, I still need to see Volume 3 as of making this video. I really enjoyed this holiday special. It felt so humble, and because of this special, Mantis became my second favorite of the Guardians after Gamora. When she reveals she's Star-Lord's sister to him, it felt so heartfelt. Not only do I like this special a lot, but I nearly love it. I think what prevents it from being in the love category for me is that I think a more fitting title would have been Mantis, a Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, as well as missing some classic superhero movie tropes. But rest assured, it could get there one day, but for now, it will be in the don't love category. And that is every Phase 4 movie and show. And as you can see, for me personally, the projects in this phase I love manage to outweigh the ones I don't. So that's already one reason why I rank Phase 4 above Phase 2. Obviously, this was all subjective, as I did make quite a few controversial choices, but at least they reflect my personal opinions on each project in these two phases, as well as in the other two. However, now I want to talk about some other factors, starting with challenging the whole notion that, even taking the general consensus of audiences in mind, Phase 4 was a drop in quality from the previous three phases. As I feel there's a reason why, when you ask someone what he or she thinks is the most underrated MCU movie, there's a high likelihood he or she is going to say either a Phase 1 movie or a Phase 2 movie. And in all fairness, I'm guilty of this too. I already mentioned I think both Iron Man 3 and Ant-Man are very underrated, but I would also say Thor and Captain America the First Avenger are extremely underrated. While many people look back at Phases 1 and 2 more fondly in their halls now, at the time of their respective releases, audiences didn't really care for them. I'm not saying people didn't like most of the films in Phase 1 or Phase 2, but they didn't really talk about them for months, nor acted as if many of them were anything special except for Iron Man, The Avengers, Captain America the Winter Soldier, and Guardians of the Galaxy. Those were the only movies in Phase 1 and Phase 2 people truly rave about and were completely blown away by. And that's only two movies out of the six in Phase 1, and the same for Phase 2. That's only 2 out of 6. So I'd consider myself merciful towards Phase 2 compared to most. Meanwhile, regardless of my personal opinions on these movies, a lot of people didn't really care for Captain America the First Avenger or Ant-Man enough to hold them up in the same league they held the other four movies I had mentioned previously when they first dropped. Many considered both Iron Man 2 and 3 and Age of Ultron disappointments, and most, to this day, would rank both of the first two Thor movies and The Incredible Hulk as some of the worst MCU movies. In fact, say what you like about the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but I'd argue those movies were talked about way more than most of the films in Phases 1 and 2. I think they just got unlucky they were released the same year as the first Avengers movie, Winter Soldier and Guardians 1, which were talked about a lot. And this is why many people, myself included, consider Phase 3 to be the best phase of the MCU so far, because it was when Phase 3 came along audiences really were talking about and hyping the MCU on a constant basis. It was this final phase of the Infinity Saga with movies like Captain America Civil War, Spider-Man Homecoming and Far From Home, Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther that's really made the MCU one of the biggest movie franchises, if not the biggest, in existence. And that's not even getting into Infinity War and Endgame, which were some of the biggest movies of all time. In fact, it's because of many of these Phase 3 movies why people look back at those in Phases 1 and 2 that they initially didn't take too kindly to with more appreciation. People began to appreciate the first Captain America movie more after seeing Red Skull return in Infinity War, and the Dark World began going through some re-evaluation after Endgame. For me personally, Civil War enhanced Winter Soldier because I saw that the Russo brothers had decided to split the Winter Soldier storyline into two movies. Even Phase 4's movies and shows have also enhanced a lot of the movies in the previous three phases. A major criticism of Iron Man 3 was the Mandarin twist, since he's a major threat in the comics and is teased to be one in this movie, only for Trevor to turn out to be a fake. While, like I said, I personally found it funny, I can understand why it annoyed a lot of people. And now, more people are kinder to that twist because we got the real Mandarin in Shang-Chi. And say what you like about She-Hulk, but thanks to that show, the Incredible Hulk no longer feels like the black sheep of the MCU, because not only have characters from that movie shown up again, but She-Hulk even referenced the events of Incredible Hulk. Remember the first time I had ranked the MCU movies on this channel and had the first Doctor Strange as my least favorite MCU movie at the time? Well, you probably noticed in my most recent MCU ranking back in January, it made its way above Incredible Hulk because Multiverse of Madness had enhanced it for me. I still don't love the first Doctor Strange movie, but I do like it a bit more than I used to. This final section will be looking at the common criticism that Phase 4 has too much content. Now, I can see where people are coming from with this. There has been a lot of content from Marvel that came out in both 2021 and 2022 that may be hard to keep up with. However, I'm going to try my best to look at it from a different perspective. First, I think all this content may have been easier to digest had the pandemic not happened in 2020. Lest we forget, Black Widow, Eternals, and Falcon and the Winter Soldier were all supposed to have come out in 2020, but the pandemic pushed them back into the following year, making 2021 and 2022 feel more crowded. As for my second point, I would argue Phase 2 went to the other extreme of not having enough content. You're probably saying, what you're talking about. Phase 2 had just as many projects as Phase 1 had, which is true, and that's exactly my point. Phase 2 maybe played it a bit too safe, nor may it have not been enough for people to continue talking about the MCU on a regular basis after the Avengers. It wasn't willing to expand the MCU too much. Considering how The Avengers was both a commercial and critical success, being classified as one of the greatest superhero movies ever made, you'd think Marvel would want to maybe increase, even if a little bit, the number of movies in Phase 2 to capitalize on how popular The Avengers was. Maybe do a Black Widow or Hawkeye project, as well as a Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man 1. And this is where I think a lot of people's disappointment with Age of Ultron comes in at the time, even though, as you know, I love that movie. A lot of people say it didn't live up to the hype due to how great the first Avengers movie was. And I think the gap between the two movies might have had a part to play in why many felt that way. Not only did Age of Ultron only come out 3 years after the first Avengers movie, but there were only 4 movies in between them. So combining those two factors, you have the Avengers still very much fresh in a lot of people's minds and not enough of a breather between the two movies. So I think the amount of content we've got in Phase 4 and are most likely going to get in Phase 5 and Phase 6 might actually work in the favour of the next Avengers movies, the Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. The 1-2 hit of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame being the two-parter finale of the Infinity Saga was so legendary, similar to the first Avengers movie, that there will most likely be a lot of pressure on the next Avengers film. However, the Kang Dynasty is said to not come out until 2026 maybe, which will be 7 years after Endgame had come out. Add to that how much content the MCU has already given us after Endgame and will continue giving us until Kang Dynasty comes out, it will give audiences and fans more than enough time to breathe after Endgame. A lot of people have said how with the multiverse saga, the MCU doesn't feel the same anymore. And I can understand that as there have been some changes, but the MCU had been constantly evolving even within the Infinity Saga. Compare Phase 1 to the beginning of Phase 3, and you could see things were different, but the core elements of the MCU were still there, and in my opinion, they still are. While for a lot of fans, especially for those who are both huge Marvel and Power Rangers fans like myself, going from the Infinity Saga to the Multiverse Saga was probably like going from Power Rangers Zeo to Power Rangers Turbo. For me, however, it's more like going from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 1 to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 2. While I do in fact miss the old heroes, rest in peace to Ian Chadwick, we love you 3000s, I very much enjoyed the new characters introduced in Phases 4 and 5, and a lot of the characters from the Infinity Saga are still around. I suggest we enjoy them while we still can, because one day we will have an MCU without not only any of the Infinity Saga characters, but maybe neither of any of the Multiverse Saga characters, like what happened midway through Power Rangers Turbo, where a lot of people stopped watching Power Rangers. But that's where I'm going to end it. Let me know in the comment section what you think. Do you think that Phase 4 is the weakest phase in the MCU so far, or do you agree with me that Phase 2 is? Or maybe you think either Phase 1 or Phase 3 is? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe for more. I talk superheroes, whether it's Marvel, Ninja Turtles, Sonic the Hedgehog, Power Rangers, Percy Jackson, sometimes DC. And if any of that is up your alley, this is the place for you. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Remember, trust your own judgment, and I'll be back hopefully very soon. Until then, Sodium285 out.
If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight like I always have.